Using hair as trace evidence can be very useful. In fact, there's a number of reasons why it's a good option to have. It's not the greatest, but it's better than some other options you might have. For one thing, hair is very small and it's easily shed. You guys know from your personal experience, you find hair on your shirt and on your pants and on your chairs and on your backpacks all the time. And you also know that hair sticks to things. Have you ever had that hair that you keep trying to get off your clothing and then it keeps just sucking back on because of static electricity? So it's really easy to carry hair from one location to another. Hair doesn't decompose quickly. I don't know how often you look at National Geographic type things, but I'm always fascinated by the pictures of mummies that are discovered, or people who were died and were frozen in glaciers, and when they thaw, they still have a full head of hair. So hair will stick around for a long time. And then if the follicle is attached, that's the root, you may be able to get DNA from it. This is where hair becomes most useful. No root, no follicle means no DNA, because when the follicle is attached, there may be some skin cells that came with it. The only way that the follicle can still be attached to a hair is if the hair is pulled out of the scalp. If a piece of hair is broken off, it's not going to have the follicle. But there's always a chance for getting DNA. And another interesting thing about hair is that you can test it for the presence of heavy metals and poisons. So you might find that down the road when you're applying for jobs, you may have to submit a hair sample, because if you are taking illicit drugs, the presence of those drugs will show up in your hair even if your urine or your blood is clean. So keep that in mind as you're looking down the road. So let's take a look at the structure of a hair shaft. It really is very much like a pencil, like your good old number 2 Ticonderoga pencil. The very center of the hair is called the medulla. It would be equal to the lead of a pencil, and there's really nothing there. The medulla, if it is present, is actually filled with air. When you look at it through a microscope, it looks black because as the light from the microscope comes up through the hair, that central core causes the light to be bent away from the eyepiece. And so you can't see the light that's coming through the medulla, and so it looks like it's black. And like I said, this is like the lead of a pencil. The cortex is the main part of, well, in some hairs it's the main part of it. In some hairs the medulla is the largest, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But this is where you have the color molecules. And if you ever dye your hair, this is where the dye is deposited so that you can change your hair color. And in a pencil, this would be like the wood part of a pencil. It surrounds the lead, surrounds the central core, but it is not the outermost covering. And then the cuticle is the outermost part of a hair shaft. It is made up of a layer of cells that covers the cortex, and we're going to be looking at different types of cuticles because the cuticle looks like scales or tiles, and this is what can make hair very useful, that and the medulla, because between the two things there are very similar patterns. Like all human hairs have a same cuticle pattern, all cat hairs have the same cuticle pattern. But this would be the equivalent of the cuticle, or excuse me, of the paint on the outside of a pencil. So when you think of it that way, as the different parts of a pencil, it's very easy to imagine what the shaft of a hair looks like. Here's a picture of it if you looked at it long ways. If you cut a pencil down its length and looked at looked at it, you've got this part right in here where you see these black streaks. That is the medulla. Now, in different types of hair, the medulla, this I could tell you is human hair because the medulla is broken. It's not one continuous piece. In other types of hair, the medulla has a different pattern to it. In dog hair, the medulla is continuous and it's very wide. So this area in here that I'm not doing a very good job of marking, this is the cortex. And this is where, like I said, this is where you're going to have the pigment molecules. So all these little dots would be the color molecules. If you have brown hair, you'll have lots and lots and lots of these color molecules. If you have blonde hair, you don't have as many of these color molecules. And then the last part is the cuticle, which is right here, and that is the part, and I chose yellow because, hey, the outside of most pencils is yellow. At least the outside of Ticonderoga pencils is yellow. So that's what a pencil looks like if you were to look at it long ways. If you were to look at it from the end, you would see, oh, hang on a second, you would see, I'm not going to do a very good job of drawing nice, neat parts of it, but if you were to look at it from the end, that would be the cuticle, and then in this area would be the cortex, and then in the very center would be the medulla. So it almost looks like a target or a bullseye. All right, so let's look at specifics of hair. So the cuticle on the outside layer forms those scales that gives the hair strength. If you color your hair, or back in the day when people used to get perms, the cuticle, one of the chemicals that you applied to the hair caused the cuticle scales to open up so that the color could get inside, or so that the chemical that caused the curls could get inside. But there are different types of cuticle scale patterns, and when you look at it from the outside, this imbricate, I'm not going to do a very good job. This is what human hair cuticle scales look like. Don't worry about knowing imbricate, spinous, and coronal. I'm just showing this to you so you'll know what to be looking for as we look at specific types of hair. This over here, the coronal, is what cat hair looks like. And then the spinous cuticle scales, this is what deer and rabbit. I'm just using the first letters because that's the easiest for me to do. So cat is coronal. This is cat hair, what it looks like. Deer and rabbit looks like the spinous, and human looks like the imbricate. So let's take a look at some human hair slides. And here's where you're going to want to jot some things down, because we're going to be determining what types of hair we're looking at based on the medulla and based on the cuticle scales. And I'm not going to try and write those things down. I don't have them in the PowerPoint, so you need to write these down. So with human hair, the medulla is either broken, which means it's not one continuous piece. Like in here you see the medulla, let me get my laser pointer. The medulla is going, and here it stops. There's no medulla here. So the medulla is either broken, or like you see in this hair shaft, it's absent altogether. And if you look over here in this hair shaft over here, there's a bit of medulla here, a chunk here, a chunk here, a chunk here, and a chunk here. So the medulla is either broken or absent. Here's another good picture of it, broken medulla. So it's in chunks, irregular chunks, or there's no medulla whatsoever. And then this is a really super up close picture of what the cuticle scales would look like. The length of the hair is going horizontal, so your cuticle scales are, it almost looks like fish scales if you ask me, which you didn't. But if we go back to here, let me draw in what it would look like. So there would be lines perpendicular to the shape of the hair. Oops. This is what the cuticle scales will look like on human hair. Stop it. All right. So let's take a look at dog hair. The first thing to notice about dog hair is that the medulla is continuous and it's really wide. There's really not a whole lot of cortex on either side of the medulla. You're not going to be able to see the cuticle scales to speak of, but that's okay because you see this really wide medulla. Now sometimes the medulla in dog hair will be in blocks, so don't be surprised if you see that. I'll show you pictures of that another time. Okay, this is what cat hair looks like, and what I would like you to notice is that the cuticle scales stick out to the sides. So there's a little bit of a jagged edge to them. You see the medulla is in blocks. This is what sometimes dog hair looks like, but with cat hair you also have the, stop it, you have the, sorry about that, I'm just struggling this morning. You have the cuticle scales that are sticking out to the side. So that's what you'll be needing to look for in cat hair. And then deer hair has this type of cuticle scales. You can't see the medulla, but the cuticle scales look like cobblestones or like pebbles. And that's the main thing that you need to be looking for with deer hair. And then with rabbit hair, again, you're not going to see the medulla so much, but the cuticle scales are in rows. So there's a row of cuticle scales there. Here's a row of cuticle scales here over on this picture. There's a row that goes right down there. And here's a row that goes right next to it. It almost looks like an ear of corn. And that's the thing to look for in rabbit hair. So let's take a look at a couple of pictures to see if you can identify them. Feel free to pause the video to look at it and think about it. Go back in the video so that you can see what the examples look like, and see if you can determine what this hair is. This is dog hair. Now take a look at this one. This is human hair because you can see that there is no medulla. You can't see the cuticle scales, but you can see that there is no medulla. And then what about this one? This is going to be cat hair because you can see the cuticle scales. The medulla is in blocks, and then the cuticle scales stick out to the sides. So hopefully that's a nice introduction to hair. You'll be doing an activity that helps you identify the different types of hair and hone in on the differences between them. Until then, have a great day.